Author's preface. I have never been more anxious about writing a book than this one in my life. Firstly, I firmly believe in the foundational idea of Ticket to Heaven, that a boy does not go to heaven. Otherwise, I would not have written it. But secondly, and more importantly, this novel sits on a precarious path between a multitude of beliefs that could easily raise doubts in some people. I repeatedly questioned whether I should write this book and where it would lead me. Then one day, I met someone who seemed to embody every aspect of my life, like the spitting image of Tanrak. The pain in their eyes, their wavering faith, and their life path screamed in my face that the truth exists, whether I speak it or not. Therefore, I spoke. I have written and read, and written and read, and written and read this novel countless times. I write with respect and faith in all beliefs in this world, and at the same time, I respect and have faith in all love in this world. I hope that when the final page arrives, every reader will understand the writer's heart completely. Why I had to write this novel. Kittisak Khongkha. Editor's preface. We all have our own paths we aspire to reach. Instead of love, too. The young man lived his life after losing his parents, relying solely on perseverance and faith. He believed that God guided him to find a way to continue living, that God gave him light, and that only God could one day reunite him with his parents. Therefore, his very being, his body, and his soul were ready to repay God with his entire life. Unlike Barth, the young man declared that he had no faith in God. This was because he had faced so much hardship and saw no way prayer could improve his life. God had never helped him. In his most agonizing times, there was never even a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel. Therefore, his very being, his body, and his mind had no need to respect God as his mother had taught him. They met one day. Even the owner of a strong and unwavering heart felt moved by the owner of a heart that was so stubborn and firmly convinced of its own beliefs. They were both unknowingly drawn to each other by something that bound their hearts together, something called love. Ticket to Heaven. The Boy Who Didn't Go to Heaven is another novel that will make readers shed tears over the tragic love story of two people. One person, who has faith in God, dreams of reaching the path to heaven so he can meet his parents again. Another one had no faith in anything. He only dreamed of the chance to see his mother, just to live peacefully with her. Kittisak Khongkha wrote this novel with a deep faith in love, conveying the story through exquisitely beautiful prose. Reading it is like watching a spectacular fireworks display, a step forward in the art of linguistic beauty, invaluable in every dimension and every passage of description. And this will be another novel that will impress readers and leave them feeling fulfilled, shedding tears for the love between Tan and Barth in utter surrender. Love that sometimes needs no meaning. Love that sometimes needs no permission. Love. If all that is asked is to love, and nothing more than love itself, then there is no such thing as impossible. For God is love, for God loves humanity unconditionally. Therefore, Ticket to Heaven might lie within the faith in our hearts. Tongta Tangchuang. Editor. Introduction. A pure, radiant light streamed through the exquisitely stained glass, transforming the otherwise dull gray world into a breathtaking spectacle of sunlight, as if it were another world. The fragrant scent of incense wafted through the air, welcoming newcomers and plunging them into a bittersweet memory of the past. A floor lined with simple wooden chairs surrounded a central pedestal, forming a unified whole. It was as if every line in the structure pointed directly to the heart, a single path leading to heaven. Heaven embraced, singing a welcoming song to all, whether they were worthy of entering or not. Most Christians had already arrived, and the rhythmic streams of light filtering through the stained glass windows illuminated the entire cathedral in a surreal spectacle. Sunday was a typical day for devotees to gather here to remember him and seek redemption, to distance themselves from the filth of life and draw closer to the afterlife when final judgment arrived. But not today, and not here. The crowd was larger than usual, filled with elation. "Our Father," someone began in the midst of, and the rest responded, waves of faith spreading throughout the place. "Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil." The newcomer's gaze swept around, filled with nostalgia. He did not immediately sit down to worship. Instead, Barth, with his rough hands weathered by nearly half a lifetime, or perhaps more, gently stroked the wooden garments of the temple, as if slowly awakening all his memories. His slow, labored breathing gradually eased, becoming relaxed, as if receiving forgiveness from someone he had never received it from before. "Baden Tangwang Wad," a calm voice called out, and the person whose name was called turned around in surprise. "Father," Bart smiled, a mixture of emotions overwhelming him, guilt, yet a desire to speak with the priest. He observed the priest carefully, noticing that he was not as angry as he had initially feared. On the contrary, the priest seemed pleased to see him. "I never thought I would see you again," the old man said. "I didn't think you would remember me, Father. It has been 20 years. I myself." The young man's voice was filled with uncertainty. "Of course I remember." The other person smiled in response. "Bart Boden Tangwang Wad. I remember all my children." The voice replied kindly, making the listener feel guilty. "Even when your own child is being ungrateful." Bart spoke, the words seeming to stem more from a subconscious sense of guilt than from any conscious thought. The parish priest before him smiled firmly, reaching out his hand, wrinkled with countless lines, to grasp the speaker's shoulder and squeezing it tightly, as if about to say something. Before he could utter a single word, a familiar figure dressed in white from head to toe ran up and whispered something to the old man. Presumably, he was being summoned because the ordination ceremony for the new monks was approaching, a sacred ceremony that had taken almost 20 years to arrive. Those who wish to be ordained as priests in the Christian religion must undergo extensive secular and religious education, beginning continuously from secondary school. This includes specialized religious studies in doctrine, languages for communication, and specific disciplines. Therefore, the ordination of new priests is a significant event in the church. Throughout the year, only a handful of priests may be ordained. "May God bless you." The parish priest uttered his final words before leaving. The young man stood stunned, unable to respond, his gaze fixed on the procession carrying the newly ordained priest as they entered the ceremony. His heart pounded violently, as if it would explode. A flood of memories overwhelmed him, making it feel as if everything had happened yesterday, or even moments before. The sensations of love and dislike were jumbled together, leaving him unable to compose himself. Barth could only sit down on his usual bench and watch as the new priest walked in with a calm and composed demeanor. Instead of love, Barth murmured unconsciously. Chapter 1. Tanrak sighed deeply, a heavy weight pressing down on his chest. His eyes stared blankly out the window, which sat near the very top of the building. A torrential downpour raged outside, like a storm of sin screaming in defiance of his pure faith. The high school student shifted uncomfortably, for the storm seemed more violent than ever. He worried that the portraits of saints on the glass would be tarnished by this calamity. "Hey!" Someone among the young monks cried out loudly at the very moment a deafening clap of thunder sounded, and all the electricity in the temple went out. The atmosphere was not completely dark, as faint moonlight still shone through the wide-open windows of the church. Tanrak was startled and almost cried out, but he managed to compose himself. His eyes, adjusting to the new darkness, looked around as he tried to regain his composure. He and his friends had been preparing the place for the upcoming ordination ceremony, but it seemed everything had to be temporarily halted. "Are you okay?" Tanrak whispered to his best friend. "It's just a power outage. What else would it be?" Khongdek replied jokingly. "Hey, I saw you sitting there cutting flower stems. The knife's still in your hand," he argued. "Stay calm, my friend," the other person said, laughing. Tanrak shrugged, not wanting to prolong the conversation. Khongdek made a sound as if to say something more, but before he could finish, the cathedral doors swung wide open, casting a blinding light from outside, the electricity likely still functioning there. The bright brilliance flooded in, creating a scene like a painting of heaven. The young man squinted for a moment, his eyes still adjusting. At first, he saw Father Anan, the priest in his familiar white robes, before his eyes widened to find someone else standing in the path of the incoming light. Tanrak's thought. Who? The first question that popped into Tanrak's head was about the newcomer. A young man, probably around the same age as him, or not much older. He had semi-wavy, jet-black hair, large, round eyes with thick, well-shaped eyelids, and a high, slightly upturned nose above soft, thin lips. His face was sharply defined, somewhat broad at the jawline, but not excessively so. His shoulders were broad, casting a dark shadow that obscured the light, making him seem more like a backdrop to a magical event than something real. A flash of lightning illuminated the scene. Tanrak felt as if he saw a pair of fierce eyes staring intently at him, but he was not sure if it was just a fleeting illusion. Hey! But before anyone could even ask a question, a loud crash startled the group of students sitting together. Someone cried out, and turning in one direction, they saw a tall, meter-high cross, prepared for the ordination ceremony, had fallen over onto the ground. The young novices rushed to help lift the cross, their faces contorted in panic. It was not a pleasant sight to see the Son of God with his face pressed to the ground, even if it was just an image of worship. Tanrak was the first to arrive and quickly checked that everything was in order. "There are no cracks at all," he said. "Let me see, Dad." Father Anan, barely concealing his anxiety, hurried forward. Everyone else helped push the cross back upright. Perhaps the ropes securing it to the post had not been tied properly. He stepped slightly aside to make way for the priest. "There really are no traces," Father Anan mused. "Let's help each other tie the rope more securely. We might need to tie it in 3 or 4 places, just in case." The eldest gave the order, and the remaining novices spread out to perform their duties, having become somewhat familiar with each other. In truth, the cross was not heavy at all, as it was the cross meant to be carried in for important ceremonies. Tanrak volunteered to hold the wooden pole while the others dispersed to help find more rope. "I'll help." A calm voice, tinged with a hint of sternness yet maintaining composure, rang out. Turning, Tanrak saw the newcomer once again blocking the bright light from the remaining streetlights. He had not been mistaken for a moment. The eyes of the person before him seemed filled with denial, though what they denied was unclear. A faint scent of sweat wafted in. Though he tried to discern it, he could not. The 2 young men helped support Christ while Father Anan reached for his personal phone. "Thanks," he replied in a low voice. "Barth," the other person said. Tanrak frowned in confusion until the speaker had to explain further. "My name is Barth," the stranger said. "Would you like my full name too?" Bodin Tengwang Wad, born in 1978. It's now 1996, so I'm 18 years old. His mouth almost spoke faster than his thoughts. Tanrak had many sentences in his mind that he wanted to say, but he held back. The person in front of him was not his close friend, Kongdek, but a complete stranger. It was not unusual for someone to show up or disappear in the middle of the school year. That was simply how life was for novice monks. People came and went, but usually more left than arrived. A novice monk's life started in junior high, but this was his final year of high school. The person in front of him had not arrived by ordinary circumstances, but perhaps by an inexplicable act of kindness. "Basketball," he said. "The basketball, you mean?" "No," the other said. "It's Barth, from St. Bartholomew." The person in front of him spoke, sounding reluctant to talk about it, though it was more of a reluctant request. Tanrak was about to ask something further, but the priest hung up the phone and turned back to the 2 young men who were supporting the pillar of Christianity. "We know each other, right?" Father Anan asked, as the 2 young men exchanged glances, seemingly questioning each other whether they already knew one another. Tanrak suddenly realized he had not introduced himself yet, so he gestured silently towards his school uniform where his name was embroidered, indicating it without speaking. "Dad entrusts Barth to your care, Tanrak." The person who was like the headmaster both in worldly and spiritual matters of this school spoke firmly. Tanrak could only frown, not understanding anything. He turned to look at Barth, but the other man seemed not to understand either, so he had to turn to ask Father Anan directly. "What can I ask you to do for you, Father?" "Barth has just transferred here out of necessity," Father Anan began. "Tanrak knows that the seminary community is stricter and has more restrictions than usual, but our school doesn't have time for an orientation for him. Tanrak is the head of the 6th grade class, so I think I can entrust Barth to you. He'll need a lot of time to adjust." The priest spoke, turning to give an encouraging smile to the new boy, confident that he had not misread the image before him. But Barth's demeanor was filled with resistance, though deep down, He could not hide it from his subconscious. The new boy shrugged and moved slightly away from the speaker, his brows furrowed slightly, but he showed no further reaction nor spoke a word beyond that, simply listening silently to the headmaster. Father Anan briefly explained to Tanrak that Barth would be moving in as a seminarian in the final term of his last academic year as a special case, and that this had been approved by the diocese. Father Anan did not give a reason, but it was probably something not worth discussing. Initially, Tanrak was asked, in a formal manner, to help look after the new student until he adjusted, especially regarding the lifestyle of a seminarian, which had many more details than that of a regular boarding school student. Tanrak, let Barth borrow the seminarian's uniform for now. The tailor will have to make a new one for Barth later, but it probably won't be ready in time for the ceremony this Sunday. The speaker uttered his final words before taking his leave, after the students had returned and firmly crucified Christ once again to the temple pillar. Soon the electricity came back on. Barth introduced himself briefly to his classmates, but no one seemed interested in talking further. The long, stuffy evening air had made their school uniforms damp with sweat, and combined with the power outage and the chaotic situation of dealing with the immediate problem, everyone was probably thinking more about the showers than anything else. "Have you ever taken a communal bath?" Tanrak asked as he led Barth back to the dorm after the students had all dispersed. Everyone seemed to have lost interest in the new student, except for those who had to fulfill their duties. "Never, but it hasn't been difficult. It's not a big deal," the other person replied. "Good. There are many daily routines here, but things won't be very busy for now because we have to prepare for a big event this Sunday. In the meantime, I'll let you know if anything comes up. Just follow what everyone else is doing for now. If you have any questions, just ask. Then, on Sunday morning, wear your monk robes and meet me at the church." Actually, the master has already written the daily schedule on the board in front of the dorm. Just follow that. If you need anything, just ask. You're all grown up now. I don't think I need to teach you everything. Just do what others are doing. Tanrak gave a lengthy explanation to the newcomer, but honestly, it was almost completely incomplete. He did not intend it that way, but the defiant look in the other's eyes made him feel that the other probably did not want any help or intimacy beyond simply going along with the situation out of obligation. Barth himself did not show any signs of wanting a friend or anything of the sort. His gaze and demeanor were full of indifference. Upon reaching the dorms, they parted ways without even asking for directions to their respective beds. In truth, the story of his new friend, who seemed like an apostle, would have been just another ordinary part of Tanrak's life as a young novice. But that was not the case at all. The young man knew that the new boy's life was partly intertwined with his own, at least through the duties assigned to him by Father Anan. Yet, for many days, Barth remained out of everyone's sight, to the point that Tanrak almost forgot what he was supposed to remember about this new friend, until the significant event of the new monk's ordination day arrived. The new recruit arrived at the cathedral dressed entirely in black from head to toe. Amidst the pristine white attire of most attendees, especially the immaculately clean robes of the seminarians, Tanrak had seen the other person since entering the church. However, the chaos of the ceremony prevented anyone from paying close attention to each other's details. Furthermore, the general Christians were all wearing colorful civilian clothes, so the all-black outfit did not stand out too much to anyone. But that was only almost, because when the ceremony began, Tanrak's peaceful world seemed to crumble before his very eyes. "May God be with you. And may he be with you." The benevolent priest spoke first, followed by the other Christians who received and knelt in reverence to God, with the exception of only one. Just one. Barth, dressed in all black, stood alone, defiantly and calmly amidst the perfect serene humility. All eyes in the room were fixed on the one person who was different. Tanrak's heart sank. He quickly entrusted the incense burner to Khongdek before rushing to drag the culprit out of the religious place as fast as possible. A multitude of noises came from all around, but Tanrak had no sense of anything else to listen to. At first, Barth resisted, but in the end, he seemed to succumb to the raging anger that gripped his arm tightly and dragged him away quickly. The two young men stood facing each other in front of the church, one having been dragged along, refusing to give up as if feeling out of sight of others. Tanrak asked the other what was wrong, irritated, But Barth's answer sent a chill down Tanrak's spine, like being doused in a bucket of ice water. I hate God, because God has never helped me with anything. Chapter 2. Tanrak pulled the new student out of the church while the ordination ceremony continued to its completion. Soon after, Father Anan followed, calm, but with eyes filled with dread, like a still sea hinting at the imminent onslaught of a great storm. Father Anan gave simple instructions. Tanrak was to take Barth to the confessional to calm down. Tanrak sat nearby, waiting, while Barth disappeared inside, until he was called back by Father Anan after the other Christians had dispersed. I don't think Barth's actions were wise, Father Anan said as his first sentence. I didn't do anything wrong. I just didn't respect what I didn't want to respect, he argued. I heard you say that God has never helped you. Is that true? The priest asked the new student directly. Barth turned to look at Tanrak, and then quickly averted his gaze, realizing that Tanrak had simply been reporting to the teacher as part of his duty. Father, you saw it too, didn't you? Isn't it God's fault that my life is like this? Barth remained silent for a long time before speaking. His eyes were filled with such pain that even a casual glance revealed it. He looked like a beast trapped in some kind of snare, thrashing and terrified, unable to receive even a touch of compassion. I don't know what kind of life experiences you've been through, the older man began calmly, without the anger that filled the younger one. But don't forget that the fact you were able to come to this school, even with your history of physical abuse that forced you to leave mid-year, that was all because of God. The headmaster spoke, gesturing towards Christ, whose gaze seemed to be fixed down from the top of the crucified cross. And if God truly existed, he was surely high above his son, by a great distance. Barth followed his gaze, deep in thought. He guessed the headmaster expected the priest to be furious, but the opposite was true. It was a fight, not a physical assault, the new guy argued, but his voice was much calmer. The truth is important, but the perception of society is also crucial. Even if you are polite and gentle, if society sees you as aggressive, you may find it difficult to function in society. The speaker paused, his voice troubled. Bowden, you are only here temporarily. In just 6 months you will complete your education and leave. Be patient, my son. I have tried my best to give you every opportunity, but that is within the limits you must accept. The speaker's voice was difficult to decipher. Was it a threat, a plea, an instruction, or an explanation? Yet, it seemed to completely dispel the other boy's anger. Barth bowed his head, swallowing hard. You may not love God, but God loves all of you. You may feel that God is not helping you, but God helps all of you. And one day you will understand what I am telling you. Father Anan spoke, placing his hand on the new boy's shoulder in a gesture of trust, his eyes filled with forgiveness. The rebellious boy bowed his head, unable to hide his guilt. The headmaster left after turning to smile at Tanrak and reiterated the importance of looking after the new friend. Wake up at 5:30 in the morning. Wash your face, brush your teeth, and shower. Then go for morning prayers and rituals. After that, at 7 o'clock, we have breakfast together in the cafeteria. At 8 o'clock, we have the flag ceremony. We study from morning until about 5 o'clock in the evening. After that, we're free until 6 o'clock. We shower and have dinner together at 6 o'clock. From 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock, we do our homework. If there's no homework, we can go play sports. From 8 o'clock onwards, we go back to the dorm and rest. At 10 o'clock, we turn off the lights and go to sleep. Did I forget to tell you anything? Tanrak spoke at length as he led Barth back to the seminary. This was the largest Christian school in this small province, not too far from Bangkok. Most of the students came from the local community, except for the seminarians, a special group of students who received scholarships and lived there full-time, ordained as Christian seminarians. Although they differed from other students only in their uniforms, the rules of the dormitory and many other routines were largely unknown to others. When were you alive? Barth asked with a chuckle in his throat, causing the speaker to turn and look for confirmation. In that split second, the class president of the 6th grade understood the priest's feelings perfectly. Although Barth's words seemed harsh and unfriendly, looking deeper beneath his impulsiveness, a deeply wounded soul hid within. Even if one could see it, it wasn't easy to offer help. If the person didn't ask, the benefactor would be helpless. Every minute is precious, Tanrak said. We're not here for personal reasons alone. All right, some of us might have financial problems, but that's not the whole story. We also have faith in God. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. Tanrak spoke firmly, not to persuade the person in front of him or deceive himself, but the young man was truly like that, as he had said from the beginning. Most people became novice monks because of economic problems at home, but not him. He heard a calling, a whisper inviting him to a distant path above. Why did you become a novice monk? Barth asked unexpectedly, even though Tanrak felt a little awkward about being addressed with informal pronouns like you and me, but it wasn't a big deal. In fact, he always referred to himself that way with his close friends. But now, he didn't feel that Barth was being too familiar with the term close, but he didn't want to argue further. Why would you want to know? Tanrak paused as he led the other person to the end of the locker room. Most of the lockers were for personal belongings. Valuables had to be left separately with the master treasurer. Barth narrowed his eyes at Tanrak. Barth had only arrived at school on Friday night. It was only Sunday afternoon. He might know a little about the dorms, but he still needed time to adjust to school matters. However, he didn't seem interested in the life of a novice monk at all. Anything he said seemed to go in one ear and out the other. I just wanted to know why you seem so devout, especially as the class president, Barth elaborated. After listening, Tanrak could only sigh before telling the story, without thinking that there was anything to hide. When I was a child, I was in a car with my parents when a drunk driver crashed into us. The car veered off the road, and I woke up in the hospital. At first, the doctors thought I wouldn't recover. They said I'd been lying in sewage for so long that my brain had become infected. But miraculously, I survived. My parents died as soon as the wreckage was recovered. My medical bills alone were in the hundreds of thousands of baht. I didn't have the money to pay, but the hospital received funds from donations from the diocese to cover the costs. The young man spoke in a normal manner, his mind wandering to the faded faces of his parents, blurred by the passage of time and discoloration. It had been many years since he had seen his parents in person. All that remained was a small locket, a memento he had received from them as a birthday gift. Tanrak picked up the memento to show his new friend. It was a faded photograph of a man and a woman with a young son in their arms. That moment of happiness was too short to have imagined. And then, Barth seemed unsure of what to say or ask. The listener couldn't discern his emotional state, but he continued speaking without overthinking it to avoid a headache. I was lost. I have no parents, only a little money left from life insurance, but I didn't know what to do next. I have no relatives anywhere, until I met you, Dad, the young man said. Yes, I'm the one who allowed you to continue your studies here. I'm a friend of your father's from our school days, Father Anan replied. Barth nodded in acknowledgement, but didn't say anything more. He introduced me to prayer. After I prayed, I felt calmer, less distracted, and stopped just crying and thinking about my parents, he exhaled. You might disagree, but thinking of God really helped me to continue living. At least I didn't feel so alone in this world. So you became a novice monk, huh? Yes. I want to see my parents again, at least in the afterlife. I pray constantly that if I die, God will take me to be with him, that he will take me to see my parents. My parents are probably waiting for me there. That's why I've been trying my best to live a good life, so that I can see my parents again. Really? Do you really believe that? Tanrak shrugged after Barth asked in a serious tone. The young man chose not to answer. He closed his locker instead, ready to show the new boy the various places where he would be performing his daily routines within the school grounds. In truth, he should have introduced Barth yesterday, but being busy preparing for the church event had led him to assume the other boy could manage his life on his own. But after today's events, he would have to reconsider. The class leader walked ahead. Their first destination was the small chapel on the school grounds where the novice monks went for their morning and evening prayers. Do you really believe it? Do you really believe in God? Do you believe that God created the world, created humanity, sent Jesus to be born, and awaits judgment at the end of the world? Just the basics, nothing else. Just that. Do you really believe it? Barth asked in a firm voice. At first, Tanrak chose to remain silent, thinking that speaking would be pointless. But the other man reached out and grabbed his elbow, stopping him. They stopped in front of a small temple, and coincidentally, right in front of a sacred painting depicting an important religious site. This painting is called Ticket to Heaven, Tanrak pointed to the painting and said, "The artist interpreted the Old Testament's journey to heaven, a path filled with thorns and beasts that prey on sinful humans and deny them the purification of their hearts." Tanrak's eyes showed faith from the bottom of his heart. "If you ask me if I believe it, I can say right away that I do. I believe it very much." Barth didn't argue, but his gaze was filled with utter incomprehension. "Because of God who allowed me to live on, because of God who provided a path after that, because of God who opened the light for me to meet him, and because of God that I will be reunited with my parents." Tanrak turned to look at the picture again and repeated the words, more to himself than to the person in front of him. He still remembered every moment of himself, a young boy who followed his parents to church every Sunday, until one day his parents were gone, and he decided to seek answers on his own. At least it might alleviate some of the pain of being alone. A young boy who secretly threw the incense burner belonging to the novice monk, because he had heard that his prayers would be communicated to God. Father Anan happened to find him and eventually adopted him, not physically, but out of the deepest compassion in his heart. A home became nothing but bricks, stones, earth, and sand when the parents were gone, but not here. Boarding school might be a nightmare for many, but not for those who had no home to return to. Here, Tanrak was closer to home than he was at his own. There was no doubt about the final path he had chosen for his life. Every word he uttered was spoken without the slightest hesitation. If you have enough faith in God, God will provide you with the right path. Chapter 3. Barth, dressed in his seminary uniform, was more reserved than expected. At least there hadn't been a fight on the very first day of the first week after the term started, following the young man's complete revelation about his family background. He seemed about to share something, but ultimately turned to look at the landscape depicting the path to heaven again and fell silent. Tanrak wasn't the type to be bossy. When the speaker chose silence, he, as the listener, chose to remain quiet as well, letting Barth's past remain a mystery. "How long do you think this new kid will last?" Khongha asked while Tanrak was folding linen on the bed one morning. The young man followed the speaker's gaze and saw that the person being talked about was still asleep, curled up unaware on the bed. A quick glance revealed no blanket. It wasn't hard to guess that he'd been pranked. Someone had stolen it and hidden it without his knowledge. He couldn't ask the master for a new one in the middle of the night, and he couldn't share one with anyone because everyone only had one. Tanrak sighed deeply but nudged the other person with a calm demeanor. "Wake up. I'll take you to the treasurer's office to get a new blanket." Tanrak called out, but the other person remained still. When he reached out to touch him, he found he was slightly feverish, but not intensely hot. Tanrak shook him again until the new boy slowly opened his eyes, looking harmless. The young man turned to his best friend and gestured for him to go ahead with his morning prayers, as the boy's condition might require taking him to the infirmary. He took the liberty of placing his hand on the boy's forehead out of concern, but thought it wasn't as serious as other cases he'd encountered. "Are you okay?" Tanrak asked as people gradually left the dorm. Sorry. Barth stirred and sat up. He seemed to be feeling unwell, but not yet bedridden. The usually stern demeanor was almost completely gone. "Then just lie here and wait. I'll go get some blankets." Tanrak spoke resignedly before walking away, passing the seminarian who was routinely inspecting the dormitories. This school resembled a small diocese, containing a cathedral open to outside Christians for various religious ceremonies, and a smaller chapel where seminarians practiced. The parish priest was in charge, followed by the seminarian masters or senior seminarians who were awaiting ordination as priests. "Why haven't you gone to the small temple yet?" Tanrak, the master asked. "Excuse me, master, the new boy's blanket is missing. I'm going to get a new one from the treasurer's office. It seems he didn't have a blanket all night last night, and he doesn't seem well. I was planning to take him to the infirmary, and if I have time, I'll follow you to the church." Tanrak explained, not really wanting to meddle in other people's lives, but his duty as class president weighed heavily on him. Ultimately, if any problems arose, he would have to answer to Father Anan anyway. Therefore, it was better to prevent problems from arising in the first place. "Barth, you mean?" "Yes." "Was he bullied?" The teacher's question broke the silence in the conversation. Tanrak turned to look at his classmate, who had probably fallen asleep on the old, dilapidated bunk bed. His weary, harmless appearance was quite pitiful, though it was easy to guess he didn't want to be there. I'm not sure, but I think it might be. Tanrak responded with a non-committal answer. Barth had been living at the seminary for several weeks now. Outwardly, everything seemed fine, but it was easy to guess that he wasn't very fond of socializing. He was always seen walking around alone, and people like him soon became targets of bullying. Even though they are both young monks, they can't control themselves in such a small way. They know that jealousy is a sin, yet they let it consume their hearts. The master grumbled in displeasure. Tanrak remained silent, his head bowed as if personally reprimanded. The young man himself hadn't bothered to notice anything unusual. When the higher-ranking official asked about the suspect, he simply replied truthfully that he didn't know, which made him feel considerably guilty of neglecting his duty. Then go ahead. Master will handle things here. The master nodded in confirmation, so Tanrak could only nod and change his target, walking back to his bed to prepare his things for the morning routine and prayers. He unconsciously glanced at the other person sleeping soundly, sweating profusely, but did nothing but watch. At first, he intended to tell the master that he would provide a blanket, but on second thought, it would be pointless since the caretaker would probably say so anyway. Tanrak hurriedly got ready. The bathroom was empty. His classmates must have all gone to the morning religious service. By the time he arrived, he passed other friends who were gradually coming out. He tried to observe anyone acting unusually, but it seemed useless. Everything was quiet. Then, Khongha walked out last. His close friend was the leader of the church choir today, which was why he was later than everyone else. Have you caught the culprit? Khongha asked. Caught what? I'm not a cop. I'm just going to get him a blanket, that's all, Tanrak replied. And what did he say? The other person continued to ask. Well, nothing really. I ran into the master on my way to the office, and he took care of it for me. He sent me on to the church. I guess Barth's probably in the infirmary by now. Tanrak answered truthfully, his mind wandering to the image of some kind of beast hiding in a cage since the first day they met. No one knew about Barth's past involvement in fights before moving here, at least not as far as Tanrak knew. The young man couldn't imagine how that bullied person would cope with it all. I bet he'll be out within a month. I don't think he can last much longer in this condition. Khongha spoke not in a disparaging tone, but rather stating the facts. Frankly, some novice monks entered the monastery due to financial problems and didn't have strong religious faith. Aggressive behaviors may be ingrained within them, even if it's not direct physical fighting. The silent bullying was so deeply rooted that it was difficult to eradicate. I wouldn't dare guess. Actually, I don't really like Barth that much, but teasing him like this isn't right either. Tanrak spoke openly to his friend. To be honest, the young man had disliked Barth ever since the day of the new monk's ordination. What that stranger had done was an attempt to defy God. But, as Father Anan had said, forgiveness was a noble virtue that a religious person should practice. He himself had dedicated his life to religion for the distant future. This test, he had to overcome it. Perhaps, the strange boy who arrived with the sound of thunder was indeed a test from God. If he hadn't been so annoying, he might not have gotten in. Khongha spoke, and although it wasn't a logically sound statement, it contained a great deal of truth. Tanrak did nothing but shake his head to regain his composure. Why, when he thought of the young man curled up on the bed, did a pity well up in him that he couldn't help but feel. Tanrak tried to avoid getting too close to the new student. Although he didn't dislike him personally, Barth had clearly shown a lack of faith in God. Unlike him, the closer they got, the more likely they would become an eyesore to each other. The image of Barth's pale face haunted Tanrak all afternoon. If someone was responsible for the new kid's bullying, it might be the principal, the headmaster, or perhaps even the class president, undeniably. He couldn't explain why he couldn't shake that image off. All he could think were prayers for Barth's safety, for God to bless and protect him. I came to visit a friend. His name is Bowden. Tanrak uttered those first words upon arriving at the infirmary, without even realizing it. The person attending to him was an older seminarian. After graduating from high school, seminarians were required to work and help care for younger seminarians for another 2 years, while simultaneously engaged in theological studies. My friend has gone home. He just left a moment ago. Tanrak frowned, glancing at the wall clock and seeing it was almost 5 o'clock. He had finished his evening classes and was walking here. It wasn't surprising that Barth would also have gone back to the dorm unless he was seriously ill. Soon it would be time to shower, eat, and perform the evening prayers. The young man nodded in acknowledgement before excusing himself and leaving without any further concern. Tanrak thought, "It's good that the other person is well." As for the bullying at school, he had probably already consulted with the teacher if he thought it was an important matter. Instead of love, a shout rang out even before he could see who it was. The young man quickly craned his neck to look and saw Khongka running towards him, breathless and looking terrified. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Barth got into a fight with Kit at the dorm. Kit said Barth stole his headphones. They argued for a short while, and then it broke out into a brawl." Khongka recounted, drenched in sweat from running across the building. Tanrak grumbled in frustration before hurrying back to the dorm. It wasn't surprising that his friend had come looking for him first. It would be best to mitigate the severity of the problem, because if it escalated to the point of involving Father Anan, there was a chance that the troublemaker would be punished, even to the point of expulsion. Often, a problem stemmed from just a drop of honey, and an entire future could be ruined by the turbulent ripple effect, which would be a great pity. "You bastard. You're the bastard." Loud shouts echoed as the two exchanged blows, disregarding all odds. The remaining 10 or so students in the dorm didn't intervene. Some cheered, others hesitated. Most had probably gone down to the cafeteria. Tanrak and Khongka exchanged nods before splitting up. Tanrak grabbed Barth from behind and dragged him away, while Khongka restrained the other troublemaker. However, Tanrak struggled against the explosive rage within Barth, managing to hold out for less than 10 seconds before Barth broke free and lunged at the other man. "That's enough. I told you to stop." The master's voice boomed sharply from the dormitory entrance. Chapter 4. The entire quarrel ended immediately. Barth and Kit sat on opposite sides of the bed, not far apart. Master Nun stood guard, preventing them from erupting in anger again. Initially, Tanrak and Khongka wanted to leave, but Master Nun ordered them to stay and help, just in case the two lost their patience and started punching each other again. It might take several people to help extinguish the raging anger. From the Bible, Matthew chapter 22, verses 37 to 38, Jesus says what the first and greatest commandment is. The master questioned both parties sharply. They both turned their faces away from each other, and neither spoke a word. "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment." However, it was the class representative who answered, seeing that no one in the dispute would speak. Therefore, Tanrak answered the teacher on behalf of everyone. "The second one is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself." The young man elaborated, before the atmosphere in the dormitory fell into an awkward silence once again. Tanrak could only look dejected, not knowing what to do. When the teacher turned to look at the other two, no one would make eye contact, until the class leader had to step in and apologize. "Khongka, follow Master Nun here." "You go see Father first," Master Nun said. "Vote and wait here. In half an hour, have Tanrak bring you to the priest's room." Master Nun thinks Father would prefer to investigate the incident one person at a time. The older man spoke sharply, leading Khongka out first. The other man followed reluctantly. For a moment, Tanrak felt the other man glance at Barth. That single moment was filled with lingering resentment. Tanrak felt an inexplicable shiver down his spine for the newcomer, but the newcomer seemed unfazed. Khongka also followed the master, as the small temple was on the way to the priest's room anyway. Tanrak watched everyone walk away, secretly hoping that the senior novice monk would save dinner for him. But suddenly, Barth stood up and started to walk away. "Where are you going?" Tanrak quickly asked, getting up to follow, fulfilling his duty to keep an eye on his new friend. "I forgot my bag in the infirmary." Barth spoke as he walked out of the dormitory, completely disregarding any rules. Tanrak could do nothing but get up and follow him. At least if Father Anan questioned him, he could explain fully. As they walked along the connecting corridor, Tanrak moved his lips several times, wanting to ask about the fight earlier, or at least about the missing headphones. But seeing the displeased expression on the other person's face, he changed his mind and decided to keep quiet. He realized it wasn't his business, so he let the other person lead the way through the shortcut that used to be the school's swimming pool. "You bastard." The sound of cursing from the person in front startled those behind. At first, Tanrak thought someone was trying to ambush him, but no, Barth was furious and about to climb down from the edge of the pool. At the bottom of the pool, belongings were scattered everywhere. A shoulder bag with Bowden's name embroidered on it was torn to shreds. Its owner was complaining angrily. This old swimming pool was rarely used because a child had once drowned there, almost losing their life. After that, it was permanently closed, and they used the more standard swimming pool outside the school instead. "Calm down, Barth." Tanrak spoke, hoping to defuse the other's anger. He himself wasn't exactly cheerful either. If his belongings were destroyed like this, it would be difficult to control his emotions. The young man could only help clean up the mess as quickly as possible. Most of it wasn't wet because the pool hadn't been filled with water for a long time, but there were traces of dirt and neglect. Tanrak glanced around before intending to invite his new friend to climb to the top, but then saw a shadowy figure quickly disappear. "The stairs are gone." Tanrak spoke in a whisper, seemingly venting his deepest feelings more than the person in front of him, while Barth spewed several more curses before unleashing a devastating punch to the edge of the pool, the scent of blood wafting faintly. He swallowed hard, trying to put on a brave face, telling himself he had nothing to do with this. But if the other person imagined he was involved in the deception or complicit in the plan, he wouldn't be able to withstand the other's blows. "That's why you're stuck here with me, you class president," Barth muttered, not in anger, but more in frustration. The listener breathed a sigh of relief that he hadn't been misunderstood. He returned the collected items to their owner, who gathered them into a tattered bag, but they were of little use. "It's all right. We'll just shout for help when someone passes by," Tanrak responded, trying not to be upset, while in reality he was burning with rage. He kept picturing Barth shivering the night before, even in the enclosed dormitory. But this was the old swimming pool, and it would surely get even colder as night fell. Nevertheless, he put on a brave face, refusing to show any weakness. "Try riding on my shoulders first. You might be able to reach it." The other person spoke while piling their belongings on one side, and making a gesture as if to clasp his hands together for Tanrak to step on, to push himself up and try to climb out of the swimming pool. But Tanrak could only shake his head firmly. The swimming pool used to be for sports competitions. It's 5 meters deep. You won't reach the bottom no matter how much you climb. Don't bother. You might slip and fall and get hurt more. "I think we should just sit and wait for someone to come by," he replied. "Who will come by?" Barth spoke more as if to himself than as a genuine question, but it yielded the same result. Tanrak knew exactly what he meant. This hallway was a shortcut behind the building, connecting the dorms to the teacher's lounge on the other side. Not many people used it because it was the old, dark back of the building. The front passageway was much brighter and easier to navigate. They had chosen this route because the stairs to the infirmary were closed, so they were taking the fire escape instead. Not everyone intentionally came this way. No one's passed through now, but someone will soon. When the master checks the roll call and doesn't see any of us, he'll probably go look for us, he continued. But the master doesn't take attendance himself. You're the one who does, and now you're stuck here with me, Barth argued. Whatever. I probably won't be stuck here until I starve to death. Tanrak shrugged and found a corner to sit in that seemed drier and less bothered by the cold wind. There were no mosquitoes down here, at least not for now. His stomach was rumbling, demanding dinner, but he could only resign himself to the fact that there was no sign of anything coming his way. Barth spoke, taking a small chocolate bar from his shoulder bag and handing it to Tanrak. Tanrak looked on with interest. The seminary didn't allow any of the children to have their own money. Meals were provided 3 times a day in the dining hall. The seminarians didn't have money to buy snacks themselves. The money their parents gave them was pooled together in a different bank account run by the master treasurer. Snacks, if any, were only given on special occasions and shared among them. The fact that the person in front of him had food at this moment was like an angel descending to announce to the world that the Virgin Mary could conceive even as a virgin. How did you get those snacks? Tanrak asked, unconsciously swallowing. It's probably not against the rules or anything, but it might save your life. Do you want to eat it? Or not? It's up to you, the other person said. But it's wrong. Tanrak hesitated. Just have faith in God, that's enough. Don't be so obsessed with the rules of the seminary. Only believe it if your God tells you not to eat chocolate. The sharp tongue of the person in front of him, yet one concealing a certain truth, freed the listener from all emotional constraints. Tanrak, utterly hungry, grabbed the chocolate in front of him and slowly nibbled at it, afraid it would run out prematurely. The young man glanced across the floor, instinctively searching for moisture. The person in front of him seemed to notice, silently offering him the remaining half-bottle of water. Tanrak thanked him before taking a sip to quench his thirst. "If I tell you I didn't do it, will you believe me?" Barth spoke up after a long time had passed, a time no one had noticed or remembered. Tanrak turned to look at the speaker. The blinding light illuminated only a sliver of his face, making it difficult to discern the emotion behind his words. But it was certainly the expression of a battered, desperate wild animal. "I believe you," he admitted. "Not because I believe everything you say, but because of the reason. You were in the infirmary all day. Where would you find the time to steal those headphones? This morning, I even saw Kit secretly listening to Soundabout under the blanket with Man." Tanrak finished speaking. "Thank you." That soft, yet firm voice seemed to release everything that had been held back for so long, unleashing a torrent. The distance between their shoulders was so close that one could hear their heavy breathing within fingertip reach. The ferocious beast had been freed from its snare by the merciful hunter. The animal stumbled and scrambled through the darkness, yearning for a resting place to soothe its wounded spirit and give it the strength to face the sunlight that would gradually creep in. "I know you're not really a bad person, even though you try to make everyone believe you are." Tanrak had spoken according to his intuition, without knowing the reason why. Perhaps it was to comfort the lonely, lost, and apologetic, urging them to accept the reality of the world, that if the dark side of night exists, there must also be a bright side of day. The other person replied softly. "You go to sleep. You've yawned 3 times already. I'll keep an eye on you and call you if anyone comes." Barth spoke, looking up at the dark sky, the stars completely obscured by the lights from the surrounding buildings. Unlike Tanrak, who could no longer endure the physical strain, he guessed that a considerable amount of time had passed. Today had been an incredibly long day, from morning till night, filled with all sorts of events without stopping. The young man lay down, using the other person's bag as a temporary pillow, secretly hoping that someone would pass by soon. Khongdek, Master Nun, or perhaps Father Anan. But that expectation was only half true. It was true that eventually someone came along, from Khongdek and Master Nun to Father Anan. In fact, perhaps 100 people. But the part that was wrong was that by the time everyone found them, it was already morning. Many people gathered to watch at the decommissioned swimming pool where 2 young men lay huddled together, shivering from the cold. The outside world might be harsh and cruel, but perhaps not within this tiny, palm-sized space where bodies could be reached and embraced. Chapter 5. Khongkha was expelled from both the novice monkhood and the boarding school on the same day. The troublemaker confessed to all charges, from hiding the blanket, stealing and slashing the bag, tricking the victim into going to the old swimming pool area and pulling up the ladder, to picking a fight over headphones that had never actually gone missing. Everyone involved was summoned to the headmaster's office for investigation and judgment. Khongkha received the harshest punishment, while the direct victims, Barth and Tanrak, could only remain silent. "Why are you doing all this?" Father Anan asked towards the end of the conversation. "I don't like that he blabbed about me and told the master. As for the matter of him sneaking off to smoke in the broom closet behind the small temple, no one has ever reported that to Master. Master saw it with his own eyes. Master hardly ever even spoke to Barth personally." The master shook his head as he spoke, before the person revealing the truth became surprised and confused. Finally, the story unfolded. Barth had accidentally seen Khongkha secretly smoking at school, and the very next day, the master summoned Khongkha to reprimand him. However, Khongkha blamed the new student for reporting him and began silently seeking revenge. When Barth became suspicious, they publicly confronted each other. "But that doesn't mean you're innocent in this matter." Father Anan turned to speak to Barth after allowing the master to invite Khongkha out to handle the school resignation process himself. "But Barth is being bullied, Dad," Tanrak blurted out. "Regarding the bullying, I agree that Barth was the victim. But as for the fight, I think both sides are jointly at fault. I should have investigated this matter thoroughly yesterday, but I was held up by an emergency outside. I think Barth needs to learn a lesson to reflect on some things." The priest spoke calmly, but with a profound impact. Tanrak observed his new friend carefully. Contrary to what he had initially suspected, Barth was not shouting or showing resistance as usual. Instead, the man in front of him kept his head down, his mouth tighter than ever, which even surprised him. "Barth," Father Anan began, "can you tell me what the 7 deadly sins are? 1. Pride. 2. Greed. 3. Lust. 4. Gluttony. 5. Envy. 6. Sloth." Tanrak thought Barth would not be able to answer, as he had always seemed to oppose religion, which originated from God. But the opposite was true. The new boy answered each of the 7 deadly sins correctly, almost perfectly. The young man looked at his friend with suspicion. Who was Barth? Why did he oppose God so much, yet possess such profound knowledge and understanding of him? Perhaps the person before him was not an outsider as he had thought, but an insider, a deeply inner being who had gradually repented and become something else. "One more grave sin is missing, my child," Father Anan reiterated after noticing the speaker remained silent for a long time. Tanrak secretly observed the person beside him. The other person had not forgotten. The uncomfortable expression on his face indicated that. However, it was more like an internal tug-of-war preventing the quarrelsome one from uttering words that were like a thorn in his side. "It's anger, Father." Barth's final reply surprised the class president standing beside him. If he remembered correctly, this was the first time he had heard the new boy speak so politely, and more importantly, he had addressed the priest as Father so respectfully. "By which virtue is anger quelled?" the questioner continued. "Patience," Barth answered firmly, and Father Anan nodded in satisfaction before explaining that Barth's punishment would be to spend time reflecting on his conscience in the chapel, observing silence for the entire time to pray spiritually and communicate with God. Tanrak will be the one watching over the child throughout that time. Father Anan continued, and that unintentionally startled those being addressed. Sitting and watching over a friend was like being punished as well, because those watching also had to remain silent and pray. "But I didn't do anything wrong," he appealed unintentionally. "For you," the speaker turned to look at Tanrak, "you do this to cultivate your own compassion, a virtue of paramount importance for becoming a spiritual leader in the future. You aspire to be a pastor like me. Joining in prayer with a lost friend to help him overcome his difficulties shouldn't be too difficult for you. Or, if you wish for me to join you in prayer, I would be happy to." The priest's words were so pure that Tanrak, who had asked the question, clasped his hands together in a gesture of apology for asking an inappropriate question. The 2 young men excused themselves from the priest's room to prepare for their next day of moral reflection in the chapel. Although it was a regular school day, Father Anan felt they were quite exhausted from the previous night and allowed them to rest, only asking that they spend some time in prayer to reflect on their conduct. Tanrak led Barth out of the headmaster's office and headed towards the small chapel. "I thought you'd make more of a fuss." Tanrak spoke more as if reflecting on himself than directly addressing his friend, who was no longer a newcomer. The person in front of him seemed different than usual, at least in his respect for the elder monk. "I didn't think Dad would fire Kit." Barth said the word father with a clear and emphatic tone, and with a logic that even the listener could not quite understand. Why couldn't Father Anan fire Khongkha? "Kit is my father's nephew," Barth continued, probably seeing the question marks all over Tanrak's face. "Actually, I already knew who did it all, but Kit threatened that he was Father's real nephew, even though we have different last names. Father would never side with me. Father would never choose someone else over his own nephew." Compassion. Instead of questioning the story any further, Tanrak accepted something silently. His heart welled up with a certain reverence for the role model, who seemed to be a clear path to heaven ahead. The monk's words were probably true. Only those who are full of virtue will ultimately reside in the realm of the Lord. And most importantly, his parents would be waiting there if he followed this path to the end. I guess so. Barth accepted without further ado. The 2 young men pushed open the small chapel door from opposite sides. Sunlight from above streamed through the stained glass windows, creating a dazzling display of colors, like magical realism. Few people visited the chapel at this time. Usually it was for morning or evening prayers or Sunday Massachusetts. Thus, the place became a secluded retreat for the 2 young men. "What do I need to do?" Barth asked, and Tanrak could only frown. "I've never taken the time to reflect on my conscience before." Do I need to pray anything beforehand? Is there a specific ceremony? Do I need to sing a song, confess my sins, or do anything? Oh, Tanrak nodded in understanding. You don't have to do anything, the elder in the spiritual path replied. Just find a seat, meditate, and tell him that you are about to examine your conscience to refine your patience. During that time, do nothing else but pray, or if possible, talk to him. Instead of responding with love, Barth's gaze swept to the sun, resting peacefully on the crucifixion of death, before looking beyond to the heavens higher up, to the Father who had sent the Redeemer to the sons and daughters cast out of the Garden of Eden, to the people stained with original sin, awaiting final forgiveness. A radiant light shone forth, bright but not scorching, seemingly inviting the two young men to draw closer to him, who always embraces those with unwavering faith. Okay. Barth nodded in agreement before walking to a quiet corner of the small chapel and slowly bowing before Christ according to the proper procedure. Tanrak watched the newcomer with surprise. His confident and unhesitating prayer reinforced the fact that the newcomer was not an outsider to the church at all. Let me know when you're done. Instead of speaking, Tanrak said, but there was no response from the other. Barth was probably entering a period of moral reflection to fully reflect on himself. At first, the young man thought his friend would pledge himself back to God's realm, but upon closer observation, he realized otherwise. The newcomer chose to sit in a dark corner, in the shadows where the light from above did not reach, perhaps due to common sense or something beneath the surface. Tanrak's thought, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. The young man shook off all distracting thoughts before picking up his rosary and beginning to pray. He started by making the sign of the cross, embracing God, and becoming one with him. Each time Tanrak prayed with the deepest concentration, the world around him seemed to become pure white. There was nothing in his sight but the radiant image of God. His body felt light, as if being embraced by a pure spiritual force. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with you. Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. The supplication to the Blessed Virgin Mary began unconsciously, leaving the young man feeling as if he were kneeling before a magnificent sanctuary, pleading for something he had almost received but not yet received. He had always heard the call of God. He believed that with all his heart. Chapter 6. The cold season was creeping closer. For others, the end of the year might be a time to celebrate a long period of hard work, to embrace loved ones, and to start anew in the coming year. But for Christians, the end of the year signified a pivotal time when the Redeemer was born, bridging the bond between God and humanity through the Virgin Mary, who remained chaste until her last breath. Our school will be closed for Christmas from Wednesday, December 25th to Wednesday, January 1st, and will reopen on Thursday, January 2nd. The teacher began making announcements during the daily homework class, which usually included a meeting and discussion before everyone dispersed to work on their own assignments. For novices who have to travel long distances to return home, please have the novice and their guardians contact the master directly regarding additional leave. For everyone else, the master requests that these existing leave dates be used as standard. Importantly, guardians must personally pick up their novices in order for leave to be granted. The lengthy announcement was nothing new to Tanrak. The young man turned to look at Barth, who had just moved his desk closer to his. Barth was staring blankly out the window, showing no interest in the long holiday weekend, practically the most important festival everyone eagerly awaited. Life as a novice monk was uneventful and lacked excitement. Rules and regulations were so strict that movement was virtually impossible. They were forbidden from owning personal belongings, spending personal money, or leaving the school grounds without permission. All of this was part of their training in simple living. Those who do not return home must remain in the dormitories as before. The school will continue to provide 3 meals a day. The novices will still attend morning and evening prayers as usual. The remaining time will be for rest and relaxation as they please. The master explained several more things before walking away, leaving the remaining seminarians to attend to their personal routines. Another important point mentioned was the annual Christmas preparations. All students would have a duty to help the school during this time, as many Christians would flock to the cathedral. What should we do? Barth asked as if nothing had crossed his mind, his gaze sweeping across the blackboard, which was laden with various assignments: welfare, reception, ceremonies, venue, documents, public relations. Many students were already signing up, and the limited number of positions available were creating pressure to secure one quickly. I don't need to go because I have to do my duty as the church spokesperson, Khongha began. And this one's the same. He's already in the choir. Khongha continued, nodding towards him. Tanrak nodded in agreement. The young man had been in the choir since junior high school. It wouldn't be wrong to call him one of the oldest members of the group. He didn't have many hobbies at the novice school. Books, sports, and music were just a few things. Really, the newcomer, who wasn't so new anymore, grumbled wearily, burying his face in his arm. It was then that Tanrak finally had time to carefully examine the person before him and discovered several truths. First, Barth's appearance resembled old-fashioned paintings of saints, often rendered in color. Although Barth wasn't strikingly handsome, he possessed a certain quality that was captivating and endlessly mesmerizing, like a spell cast upon the heart of the image, instantly stopping the viewer in their tracks. Another point was that Tanrak knew very little about Barth, considering him just a classmate. He had no idea what Barth liked to do in his free time, what his passions were, or what his future held. His memory of the new boy was one of rebellion, unconventionality, and rejection, a man who emerged from darkness on a rainy night, who had left in a fight and almost left in another, who defied God, and even now he wasn't sure if he had truly returned to God's embrace. "What do you like to do?" he asked. "Looking for," Barth replied, looking confused. At first, he almost didn't answer, but when he saw the look in Tanrak's eyes, he probably thought the question was directed at him. "That's your hobby. That way I can help you figure out what kind of position you should apply for." "Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's help each other choose." Tanrak began, while Khongha chimed in with interest, their eyes sparkling, in stark contrast to the person having to answer, who was filled with utter weariness. "No," the person replied emotionlessly. "Come on. Think carefully." Khongha refused to give up. "No," Barth repeated. "So, what do you usually do in your free time?" "Around 7 or 8 p.m., after you've finished your homework." Tanrak didn't give up either. Suddenly, he felt like he wanted to get to know the person in front of him better. "Go to sleep, or go ask the teacher for some snacks," Barth replied, and slumped back down onto the table. Tanrak still hadn't lost his patience, but it seemed Khongha had. He shook his head and excused himself to do his English homework in the sound lab. The young man who remained continued to be bossy, perhaps because he had finished all his homework. "So what are you going to do? You can't be unemployed on Christmas Day. You're a novice monk," Tanrak retorted. "You can do the same thing. It's easier," Barth replied casually. "What? Singing in harmony. You can sing?" he asked. "Anyone can sing, right? Even the novice monks sing in the temple every day." Barth continued to answer dismissively, causing the listener to burst into laughter. What he said wasn't wrong. Every novice monk had to sing practically as a way of life. But the choir wasn't like that. They selected pitches, divided rhythms, and created small-scale performances through the harmonies of the lyrics. "Actually, the choir is short on members. The choir leader wants to add a tenor, but we don't have anyone yet," Tanrak said. "Tenor?" Barth raised an eyebrow in question. "Yeah, tenor, the second highest voice in a choir, from soprano to alto to tenor, and then bass," Tanrak said, tracing his fingers. "The choir is currently missing a tenor, a high-pitched male voice. Why don't you try auditioning? Actually, there's no need for anything formal. Just go see the choir leader." Barth didn't answer, but nodded as if to say, "Take me there now." Tanrak accepted, confused, but willingly agreed to go along. The choir leader was an older seminarian who had already graduated from high school and was responsible for overseeing the seminary for another 2 years. Tanrak led Barth to the choir's room, located on the lower floor of the hall, not far from the rehearsal room. The choir leader was there, so Tanrak informed him of his intention on behalf of his friend. "Yes." The choir leader nodded simply before turning to rummage through a pile of documents to find suitable song lyrics for the selection process. The requirement might be to choose songs that appropriately showcase the use of low vocal range. Tanrak glanced at his friend, who who seemed to be getting a little nervous. "Cheer up, man," he whispered. "He isn't letting me practice first?" "I didn't expect to have to sing right away," Barth whispered in reply. "Probably not. I think he's just looking for a match for you." Instead of offering comfort, before a clear conclusion could be reached, an alumnus picked up a piece of paper and walked towards the electric piano. He then handed the paper to Tanrak, who was closer, and had Tanrak pass it on to the newcomer. The choir leader then nodded as a signal. "Once you get into the lyrics, you can sing right away. Keep your voice natural, don't try to fake it." "What? You're going to make me cry, huh? Can I practice first?" Barth pleaded. "No need for rehearsals. I want to hear your voice, not your singing technique. Just the tone first, whether you're a tenor or not. If you are, then we'll talk. Because if you're a bass, you probably won't be accepted. My bass line is already full. We just need a tenor." The choir leader responded, his fingers gliding across the electric piano, giving the other no room for further negotiation. Tanrak watched his friend swallow nervously and offered a reassuring smile. The young man gently clenched his fist, trying to help his friend relax. "Cheer up, man," he whispered. Barth took a deep breath before nodding, seemingly regaining his composure. The atmosphere in the choir room was that of an old classroom that had been converted into an empty space. Some soundproofing was added to minimize disturbance to others. One side had a blackboard for writing. The other wall was blank for displaying important song lyrics. The rest was mainly learned by holding instruments and memorizing them. The only instrument in the room was an electric piano, providing rhythm. The music drifted closer to the other rooms, coinciding with the first notes of the melody sung by the auditionee. In this vast world, I have discovered many kinds of love, but I don't understand the meaning of all of them. People define love in many different ways. However, I only understood when I discovered the purest kind of love, a love that expects nothing in return, a love like refreshing raindrops on cracked, dry land during a drought, enriching it with love and loyalty forever. Barth's voice was more beautiful than Tanrak had imagined. It wasn't the pure, clear high tones of a woman's voice, but rather deep and resonant, yet not aggressive. The tone, accompanied by the piano melody, was surprisingly warm. Tanrak felt as if he were being lulled into a land of love without realizing it. The hymn spoke of love, a love found in an unexpected place, a love amidst an endless, long drought, a love that will change the rest of your life forever, never to return. Chapter 7. The new student in the second semester of their final year of high school finally got a position in the choir, and joining the choir made Tanrak and Barth inseparable. They regularly came to the club room in the evenings, including weekends. As December began, everything at the seminary became increasingly hectic, including for Khongdek. For many days, Tanrak barely spoke to Khongdek outside of class. "Hello, Brother Ath." Tanrak was the first to speak upon arriving at the choir club room, followed by Barth, who bowed respectfully. Brother Ath was an alumnus who tested the new members and currently held the position of choir leader. The choir required singers of all vocal ranges, so the novice choir only practiced the tenor and bass parts using recordings. As the actual performance approached, the choir would practice with the Christian congregation of the main church, which included female soprano and alto singers. "Excuse me, could you do me a favor?" The senior student spoke, pointing to a pile of equipment haphazardly arranged on one side. "For the upcoming Christmas event, Father Anan will be opening the first floor of the seminary to the public, like an exhibition. So, Brother Ath asked some of the students to help tidy up the room and get it ready for the event. We only invited 2 alumni because there wasn't much work to do. The more people, the more complications. And the job fell on Barth, a new member of the club, who then invited Tanrak. "If I'm not around, please look after the club for me," Ath said casually while decorating the lyric chartboard to resemble the nativity scene. Tanrak raised an eyebrow before realizing the speaker had turned to face him. "Me, brother?" he asked. "Yeah, of course. If it's not you, then who?" The speaker chuckled softly. "The club only has 2 high school students, you and Tang. Tang probably won't continue as a monk anyway, so it's just you left." Brother Ath spoke as if discussing the weather, while the listener just frowned. "Is Tang going to resign, brother?" "How did you know?" Tanrak asked. "Wow, are you pretending not to know, or are you really just pretending?" Tang has been secretly dating his girlfriend since middle school. They exchange letters almost every day. There's probably a whole basket full of love letters in his locker. Someone like him is bound to quit and get married one day, have kids, and have a wife. How could he possibly stay a monk? The alumnus recounted the journey to ordination as Christian priests, a process that took almost 20 years. It began with becoming a seminarian, usually starting in lower secondary school and continuing through upper secondary school. After graduating from high school, seminarians spent 2 years mentoring younger seminarians before dispersing to seminaries in various areas to study specialized subjects, languages, and religious teachings. This process continued for another 10 years after high school graduation before they were fully ordained as priests. Tang's family has financial problems. Actually, Tang's love affair isn't a secret. Father and the priests know full well, but they've turned a blind eye. Tang is a well-behaved boy. He's never been rebellious or given father any headaches, but he's poor. If father didn't help, he wouldn't be able to afford his education. He doesn't even have an ID card. Even if we didn't get a priest, we would probably get a good Christian. After graduation, he'll probably go on to further studies or find a job. With love burning so strong, it's impressive he's even managed not to climb over the fence and run away from school. Tanrak nodded in agreement, quite surprised that all the adults at the school knew about Tang's relationship. A romance with a novice monk was forbidden. If discovered, the student would be reprimanded or, in the worst case, expelled. But Tang was different. Even though they exchanged letters and smiled openly, making it known to everyone in the dorm, Tang never misbehaved. He never skipped school to see his girlfriend, never stole Father Ainan's phone, and never did anything more than secretly exchange letters whenever the opportunity arose. Life as a novice monk is so hard, brother. Tanrak spoke with a lack of words. Part of him wanted to avoid commenting on his friend, while another part felt strangely relieved. He had never experienced love before, never even knew what romantic love between a man and a woman was like. The young man had never been interested in such matters, never viewed any woman as anything more than a fellow human being. All he knew and understood was the love for his parents, the love for God, and the love for his fellow human beings as covenant neighbors. "Can you play the piano?" Barth asked, snapping Tanrak out of his daydreaming and bringing him back to reality after the alumnus excused himself to prepare additional documents for requisitioning supplies at the treasurer's office. Barth looked at Tanrak's face. There was still plenty of time until the evening prayers. "Okay, but not well," he shrugged. "Really? Teach me," the other person said. "Why? Do you want to play?" "Yeah, I thought Brother Ath looked cool playing." Tanrak listened and moved his lips to say something. Like, is Barth going to use this to woo a girl? The young man admitted to himself that after hearing Brother Ath talk about Tang, his perspective on Barth had changed. Barth was probably like Tang, here only temporarily, borrowing God's grace for healing and leaving when his wounds were completely healed. There was no reason or indication that he could remain as a seminarian long enough to become a priest. Unlike him, who was determined and considered it a prayer he could not betray. How should I put it? Tanrak paused for a moment. I've never really studied it properly. I just learned it by observation. Can I teach you the way I learned it? Just put your fingers on the chords and press slowly according to the rhythm. There's no real principle involved. He spoke at length. Sure, just enough to have some fun, Barth smiled. Then come sit here. Tanrak beckoned Barth to sit down in front of the club's electric piano, before pointing to the 2 white keys side by side in the center of the piano. This is called do, the middle note. If you move to the right, the other dose will go higher. If you move to the left, the other dose will go lower. When you place your hand, place it on this do begin. Tanrak explained, while the other man hesitated awkwardly, causing him to become somewhat annoyed. He took Barth's hand and placed it on his target area. But in that same split second, the young man felt strange, as if he had just realized that this was the first time he had intentionally touched the other's hand. It was a feeling difficult to explain, perhaps because they were outsiders to each other. That feeling was different from anyone else's, unlike any feeling he could ever compare to anyone else. Barth's hands were rough, not cracked, but they were noticeably calloused compared to his own. That might have been the longest second in a young boy's life. The distance from his lap to the C chord on the old piano seemed like a light year. Tanrak's heart couldn't behave normally. No, it couldn't. It trembled, raced, and sometimes the rhythm vanished from his chest, as if it had never existed, untouched, never real. Here. Okay, right here. And then what? Well, nothing more, just press the key. Tanrak spoke hesitantly and nervously, not intentionally trying to be disruptive, but as if his mind had gone completely blank. Meanwhile, Barth refused to let go of his hand. In fact, he did the opposite. He pulled Tanrak to sit beside him, then took his hand and placed it on the wide piano keys, holding it innocently and unaware. Their hands rested on the instrument as if side by side. What do I press next? Well, just press the keys according to the music. Tanrak spoke, barely having held onto any sense of reason. It was as if his brain had suddenly short-circuited and become someone else's. He could only sit still, barely able to resist falling off the chair. How am I supposed to know which note to press and how to play it for each song? Just try pressing the key first. Like this, just try it out. Tanrak pulled his new friend's hands, urging him to put weight on the instrument, to play just one note. Contrary to his expectations, it was a hoarse, laughing sound, a deep, trembling tremor from the heart. Barth's hands moved slowly, not on the sheet music, not according to the teacher's instructions, not anything the young man could have imagined. For a moment, each of Tanrak's own fingers became innocent. When he takes me in his arms, he speaks to me softly. I see life through rose-colored glasses. He tells me words of love, everyday words, and it does something to me. When I'm in his embrace, he speaks softly to me, my world turns pink. He tells me he loves me, whispering sweet words every day. I feel so overwhelmed, my world turns pink. The boy had lied about everything. Barth could play the piano, perhaps even terribly well. His new close friend had manipulated the young man, drawing him into a sweet melody that was impossible to put into words. Tanrak's heart felt like it was about to explode. It was suffocating, frustrating, yet so sweet it felt like he couldn't breathe. He couldn't answer, not even a little, what all this meant. He only knew he wanted a little more time, just one more song. Chapter 8. The breath of the determined boy striving for heaven seemed to be cut short for a long time, long enough to die and be reborn. Tanrak tried to gather his wits, resisting the weakness in his hands from succumbing to the other's grasp, but he couldn't succeed. It wasn't until the final measures of the song about the sweet world that the young man and his body were finally free. He took deep breaths again and again, trying not to show any signs of distress. His gaze swept around, only to find that there was no trace of Christ's eyes in the room. What's wrong? Barth asked, as Tanrak unintentionally pulled his hand away from the other's grasp. The young man turned his face away, gazing at the unfinished nativity cave, swallowing all strange feelings as deep as possible. Your shirt smells, it's full of sweat, he teased. The other person burst into laughter. That's true, I'm all wet. Although not intentionally emphasized, his new friend's upper body was indeed drenched in sweat. Before coming here, Tanrak had gathered his homework notebooks to take to the master in his room. Barth, who was waiting, had picked up a ball to kick around. By the time he returned, he was already covered in sweat. After arriving at the clubroom, they were still busy with trivial tasks. Their thin, breathable school uniforms were soaked and clung to the other person's body. Tanrak gestured sarcastically, but it only made the other person burst into laughter again. That's all there is to it. The other person didn't solve the problem by moving away, so his sweat-stained shirt wouldn't stain Tanrak. Instead, Barth chose to carelessly take off his school shirt and toss it onto a chair on the other side, leaving his upper body bare. And yes, there was no longer a sweat-stained shirt. Barth, what else? Why did you take off your shirt? You complain so much, it annoys me. Barth continued speaking with a hearty laugh, ignoring Tanrak's protests and urging him to put his shirt back on. The other man pretended to cover his ears and acted as if he hadn't heard anything. Put on a shirt. I don't know. I don't know. I didn't hear. I didn't hear. Barth covered his ears with his fingers and wriggled around, speaking and sticking out his tongue in a comical way. Conversely, those watching him found it neither funny nor comical. Instead, it was an overwhelming, uncontrollable, and embarrassing sensation that surged within them. Barth's body seemed meticulously sculpted by the most delicate artist. His broad shoulders, neither too large nor too small, perfectly complemented his beautifully shaped chest, the result of regular exercise. His skin was smooth and radiant, inviting the eye to follow down to his slender, well-proportioned waist. Put on a shirt. I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. I didn't hear, I didn't hear, I didn't hear. If there was one feature that was hard to look away from, it was the 6 perfectly sculpted abdominal muscles, carved with just the right amount of curves and contours, neither too much nor too little. The soft, fine hairs around the navel and downwards seemed to subtly draw the eye in. Tanrak's breathing hitched, as if his body was short-circuiting and he could no longer control it. Tanrak prayed for someone to appear, to break this strange atmosphere and end it all quickly. Anyone, just someone. I think I'd like you to teach me another song. Barth, no, I'm not playing anymore. Tanrak tried to refuse, but it was almost like a faint whisper that quickly faded into his throat. His new friend seemed barely aware of his resistance. He was pulled closer to sit on the piano again, but this time it was as if his senses had completely shut down. What song was playing? He didn't know. Where exactly were they residing? Unseen. What feeling was unfolding? It was indescribable. Barth reached out his body to grasp his hand, guiding him to play the musical notes. The young man found himself in a rather intoxicating embrace, his mind completely blank, as if nothing had been left behind. The dangerously close proximity made it difficult to breathe. I'm going now. See you this evening. Tanrak interrupted, gathering the meager strength that remained, combining it all into one, and with great difficulty, pushed himself up to his feet. Hey, where are you going? I'm going to the bathroom. Oh, I'll come too. No need. If Brother Ath comes back, he won't find anyone. Tanrak quickly brushed it off and ran out of the room without looking back. The young man didn't have a mild or severe stomach ache, but it was a shockingly difficult to describe feeling. It was so close to a painful ache that it was hard to accept, but damn it, he didn't want to. A churning sensation lurked deep beneath the surface of his body, a feeling he didn't want to acknowledge. Tanrak ran down the hallway as if someone was chasing him frantically, but there was no one there. The hallway was empty. Perhaps only the abyss within him was violently pounding against his chest. Overwhelmed, too much to bear. Tanrak ran down the hallway, his head bowed, avoiding eye contact for fear of seeing the sight he least wanted to see. The image of God, the Holy Cross, the statue of the benevolent Virgin Mary. Tanrak opened the door and entered the treasurer's office. This room had always been a secluded haven for all the students. No one wanted to get involved or cause trouble. If it were a place of refuge, it would probably be the best. He walked to the bathroom, opened the door, and slipped inside silently, locking the door behind him as if to shut off any other feelings from entering. I'm sorry, son. Instead of stopping, he murmured to himself, his mind drifting to the pristine white land he had encountered when he offered his sacred prayers. The young monk's once ragged breathing gradually slowed, and he had the opportunity to gaze at his reflection in the mirror slowly. The bathroom for the senior monks was different from the bathroom for the junior monks. The outside bathroom was communal, with shared showers and minimal private space. It was divided into narrow stalls, except for the toilet area, which had no mirrors at all. The only reflective surface available was the long, unprivate hand-washing area. But the monk's restroom had a peculiar appearance, one that few knew about. It seemed to have been converted from another room, and thus had a mirror large and tall enough to see a person's entire body. Tanrak had accidentally discovered it once while running errands and experiencing sudden stomach pain. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. The novice began to speak of the Trinity, but couldn't clearly answer the question of why he was doing all of this. Tanrak slowly removed his school uniform, carefully examining every inch of his body. A feeling of dread and terror washed over him, as if at any moment a strange monster would grimace and devour the body, turning it into a parasite, stained with the dark, festering sins that could not be cleansed by the final flame. Tanrak's shoulders were much narrower because he didn't exercise regularly. His chest was flat like that of a very thin person who didn't often eat sweets or snacks outside of mealtimes. His torso was skinny and lacked any attractive muscles. He only played sports when forced to. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Tanrak uttered the words, simultaneously unbuttoning his school trousers carelessly, letting them fall to his ankles. His mind forgot everything, yet certain images replayed on, not a sacred light, but a certain darkness. Soft, wispy hairs that unconsciously drew his gaze downwards. With trembling hands, he nervously grasped the last piece of clothing, gathering all the strength he had left to push it down to his feet, exposing his body, a body steeped in original sin, banished from paradise and never to return. The sight of the naked, yet impure, body captivated the novice, almost making him forget to breathe. He examined certain parts of his body that he hadn't paid much attention to before. His feelings were no different from those of some kind of heretic, incarnated to inhabit this body for the purpose of sin, committing sins, or even becoming sin itself. In the name of the Father, he said, touching his forehead. And the Son, he touched his breast. And the Holy Spirit, he touched his left shoulder and his right shoulder, respectively. Tanrak stood still, enduring something unbearable, before rushing to the sink and vomiting everything out. Old food mixed with the bitter, greenish residue of digestive juices filled the air, emitting a pungent stench like a grim cesspool. Tanrak could do nothing but cry uncontrollably and begin praying. His sobs echoed repeatedly in the confined space, unheard by anyone. No one heard. Chapter 9. The cold weather brought hunger with it. In Thai culture, the cold might be seen as something to celebrate, associated with various festivals and the end of the year. But not for the novice monks deeply rooted in the origins of Christianity. The low temperatures were a harsh reminder of famine, leading to fasting as a lesson in patience, and also teaching humanity the sin of gluttony, to consume only what was necessary. Therefore, humans should restrain themselves from the desires that tempt them to go astray. The soft melody of a small radio filled the air as Tanrak stepped into the school's main chapel. Here, outside Christians were welcome to participate in the veneration of the Son of Christ, offering the closest possible opportunity. The seminarians took turns assisting Father Anan during the ceremony. The young man had arrived well early, for several personal reasons. One undeniable reason was to avoid someone who had been haunting him for the past few days. In the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Tanrak spoke as he reached for the holy water in the basin at the church entrance, preparing to perform the usual act of worship to the Holy Trinity. But for a moment, he hesitated, struck by a strange feeling. His hand, about to touch the sacred liquid, froze. Certain images haunted him, impossible to deny to his subconscious. The empty body reflected in the never-deceiving mirror. The uncontrollable reactions revealing impure intentions. The undulating ripples of muscle that had unintentionally swept across his vision. The young novice's hands trembled uncontrollably. The distance to the water basin seemed endless, like an eternity. His breathing became noticeably short and erratic. Deep down, he tried to put on a brave face, but it was an overwhelming struggle. Instead of love, the familiar voice startled the person being called, causing him to instinctively withdraw his hand. Turning around, he saw the culprit behind all the trouble, Barth, dressed in white, the uniform of an assistant mass officiant. His expression wasn't exactly accusatory, but it was tinged with suspicion. "Why didn't you wait for me?" the other person grumbled. "I went to take a quick shower, and when I turned around, you were gone. We're on the same shift, you should have walked with me. I finished quickly, so I was too lazy to rush you. Better to come out first," he replied dismissively. "What's wrong? You usually wait for me." "Nothing. I'm just too lazy to rush." Tanrak brushed it off again, trying to avoid the harsh gaze, trying to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, Barth reached out to touch the liquid and performed his usual act of reverence. Unlike the one who had changed his mind, shoved his hand into his pants pocket, and pretended to forget. "I'm going to practice swinging the incense burner first," Tanrak said. "What the hell? You've been swinging that thing around since middle school. What are you practicing for today?" Barth spoke with a mixture of confusion and suspicion, which only made the person being observed even more flustered. The respondent's voice trembled at times, but he managed to mask it. "Last time I accidentally made the wrong hand gesture. I wasn't very confident." Okay, make yourself comfortable. Let me know if you need any help." Tanrak made an excuse before walking away to the back room for the priests and seminarians. Barth was in charge of reading the Bible that day, so he went to arrange things with the Christian representative who would be reading alongside him. Therefore, the two didn't have much opportunity to talk. The Mass would begin around 9 or almost 10 o'clock in the morning. Christians were already beginning to arrive at the church, but only in small numbers. The priest had arrived and was taking his place in the confessional for those who wished to confess their sins before receiving communion shortly afterward. "What's wrong with you? Behave yourself." The voice startled him. Tanrak turned around and found Khongkha already sitting in the preparation room. He didn't know how long he'd been there. The young man seemed to have lost his senses, unaware of anything around him. "When did you get here?" he blurted out. His best friend frowned. "I've been here ever since you started pacing back and forth nonstop. You look like a madman. Did you steal something? You look like you're running from the police." Tanrak was stunned into silence until the other person's expression changed. "Don't tell me you actually stole it." Khongkha frowned. "That's crazy. Who would do that?" "I'm just a little confused," he replied. "What's confusing you?" "I don't know," he said, thinking to himself. "I'm not sure if what I did was a sin or not. I'm uneasy, but I'm not certain. You probably can't tell me, can you?" Khongkha shrugged. "Well, I'm not sure." Tanrak spoke awkwardly, but his brain screamed at him. Tanrak's thought. "No, I can't tell him. I absolutely cannot tell Khongkha. He's my fellow novice monk. We've studied together since high school, and we've always aimed to become priests together. I can't let Khongkha know that I'm teetering on the brink of straying from the right path. Then why don't you go and confess your sins? God might have the answer for you." Khongkha spoke, and that was like a flash of light that made Tanrak feel strange. The young man hesitated. Khongkha turned to look at him again with a sharp gaze that made Tanrak avert his face. Soon, his close friend walked away without a word, as if to give Tanrak time to make a decision. The young man glanced at the wall clock again. There was still about an hour before the Sunday morning ceremony began. The priest was already in the confessional, and it would be private enough for him to discuss, or at least vent, something that had been weighing on his heart. Tanrak decided to go to the confessional, a narrow room tucked away from the central ceremonial area. This space was provided for Christians to confess their sins to God before Mass began, in order to receive the sacrament of renewal and become new people. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Tanrak began to speak, sitting down on one side of the confessional. The room was made of wood, about 2 meters on each side, with a small opening in the middle to allow sound to pass through easily, but neither the priest nor the confessor could see each other directly. The young man began the pre-confession prayer as he usually did, but this time it was more difficult than ever. Every word was hesitant, as if requiring immense energy to utter, until he heard the person on the other side shift. "What is my sin? Bless me, Father, for I am not sure if I have already sinned." The young man spoke from the bottom of his heart, unsure even to confess, because he wasn't even sure if it deserved to be called a sin. "What makes you think that?" "I'm not sure," Tanrak began. "Many times I understand that what I'm doing is permitted by God, but sometimes I feel afraid." "What makes you think that way?" "Love, Father. Love," he choked out. "I feel that I am loving my fellow human beings as I love myself. I should be happy, for God taught me to love my neighbor as myself, but instead I am burning with sorrow and distress." The novice spoke, breathless and struggling to control his voice, trying to convey an identity that the person on the other side of the confessional couldn't recognize, but he was utterly helpless to know if he had succeeded or not. What he was saying was filled with confusion, like swimming aimlessly in a vast, inescapable ocean. "Love is not wrong, my child." The priest began to answer, and Tanrak listened attentively. "Love is something God has taught humanity to always give to one another. But this love must be pure, unconditional, and without the desire to possess. If Christians can think like that, love will always receive God's approval." "Isn't love a sin, Father?" he murmured to himself. "Love and lust are so close together it's frightening," the gentle voice replied. "If love is unconditional, if it doesn't yearn to possess, then it is love. But if love demands reciprocation, if it desires possession, then it ultimately becomes a grave sin." "I don't think what I did was a sin," he said. "I am delighted for you, my child. True love, within reasonable boundaries, is certainly not a sin. You don't need to confess anything." The priest spoke in a familiar voice at the end. It was as if something had been completely washed away from Tanrak, like a body stained with filth, cleansed and polished to become pure and radiant once again. Tanrak opened the door and walked out of the confessional, feeling like he had become a different person. But before he could do anything, he looked up and met the gaze of someone, a friend who was no longer new. Barth, dressed in his white robes as a seminarian, his pure face fixed on him like an angel scrutinizing a sinful human for any inappropriate actions. Tanrak instinctively averted his gaze. "Are you angry with me about something?" "I think you're acting strange," Barth asked. "No, not at all," Tanrak replied, trying to cover everything up as normally as possible. "Before this, I had a lot of stressful things going on, so I kept quiet. But now I've talked to Father, and I feel much better. Finally, God gave me the answer. Now I'm back to normal, very comfortable." Tanrak laughed as he walked over and casually put his arm around his increasingly close friend's shoulder. For a fleeting moment, it was as if a high-voltage electric shock coursed through his body, but in just a fraction of a second, everything vanished into the ocean of friendship. The young man smiled broadly. At first, Barth seemed not to quite understand, but seeing his friend acting normally, he no longer questioned it. Tanrak sighed with relief. A love that is right and within boundaries was certainly not a sin. Chapter 10. O Lord, please grant me your immense love. Cleanse my troubled heart, my heart filled with jealousy. O Lord, please grant me the path of light. Lead me to love, a love that is unconditional and unpossessive. The music serenaded the cathedral, creating a sense of a heavenly transition from earth to paradise. The choir from the seminary, led by alumni, was rehearsing the songs for the upcoming Christmas carols. Tanrak and Barth were also practicing, but they stood on opposite sides. Tanrak, singing the lowest bass line, stood at one end, while Barth, the tenor, stood across the center. "Okay, let's take a break." The headmaster's voice, overseeing the choir, boomed, bringing the long, soothing melody to an end. Today, the choir was large because rehearsals at the church included female voices, such as sopranos and altos. Many of them were Christians participating in the activities, and some were female students from the same school network. The female voices usually rehearsed separately, and in the choir, the seminarians often filled the male roles and voices. "It's all right. I can stand." A girl's voice floated over, drawing Tanrak's attention. No, she wasn't loud enough to make everyone turn around. On the contrary, her voice was reserved and almost a whisper. The girl's name was Cherry. She had a beautiful, gentle alto voice that wasn't harsh on the ears. The young man had always listened to her with excitement. Cherry wasn't new to the choir. She, like him, had been singing in various religious ceremonies since junior high. Another one heartbroken. A man in the bass group spoke up after someone offered Cherry a chair to sit on while waiting for rehearsal, but she politely declined. However, this almost implied a desire to keep her distance. The well-meaning person withdrew the chair dejectedly. Tanrak could only watch. Cherry always had men trying to court her, but none had ever managed to break through that incredibly thick and high wall around her. But before his thoughts could wander further, the call to resume rehearsal rang out. "Can I have the same song again?" The choir leader spoke, but things didn't turn out as everyone expected. A variety of strange noises erupted in the middle of the group. "Okay. Hey, ouch. Excuse me. It's all right. We're clumsy too." Before the music could resume, a minor commotion erupted unexpectedly. A man in the tenor group shifted into position and bumped into a chair where someone had placed a glass of red juice during the break. The juice spilled, but not all the way to the floor. Instead, it splashed onto Cherry's shirt, soaking it and staining it bright red. The clumsy man apologized profusely, while the victim tried to salvage the situation. Tanrak looked again, and his eyes widened. That man was Barth, the tenor. Tanrak's feelings changed in a way that even surprised him. It was as if something had sucked all the air out of his chest. His heart pounded faster and faster. The young man turned his face away, but only for a second before he couldn't help but look back. The murmurs from around him grew louder. He averted his gaze again, turning towards the Holy Christ to compose himself. It wasn't just Tanrak. It seemed many other seminarians were doing the same. "Excuse me." Barth's voice was filled with discomfort. The bright red liquid had splashed onto the already thin schoolgirl's shirt, soaking it completely and revealing her skin. The wet fabric clung to the curves of the young girl's body as she began to mature into adolescence. Though unintentional, The sight created an awkward atmosphere for everyone present. Most of the boys turned their faces away, but many others did the opposite. The perpetrator himself seemed flustered and didn't know what to do. "Excuse me. It's all right." Both Cherry and Barth were at a loss for what to do. "Does anyone have a jacket? A winter coat would be fine." Barth spoke loudly, sweeping his gaze around, but everyone seemed to shake their heads or murmur in denial. Cherry tried to pull her wet, heavy shirt away from her skin, but the fabric was so damp that when she let go, it shrank back against her body. "Does anyone have a jacket? A winter coat would be fine." Barth repeated his plea, but this time it seemed even more desperate. Tanrak observed the situation without getting involved, feeling like a complete outsider, with no room even for him to reach out with his fingertips. "Excuse me." The person in question apologized for the umpteenth time, but this time was different. Barth decided to take off his novice monk uniform, brushed off the dust, and shook it as if to get rid of as much dirt as possible. He then nodded as if asking for permission and draped the robe over the girl in front of him. Tanrak heard the sighs of many people. The almost scandalous scene vanished from everyone's view, especially in this truly sacred place. "Thank you." There was not the slightest sign of disgust or resentment from Cherry. The girl lowered her head, her face flushed with embarrassment. She probably felt what everyone else felt as well. Barth whispered something to Cherry, as if consulting her, before the choir leader walked over. The chaotic situation continued for a while longer. One of Cherry's female friends led her to the restroom, with Barth following at a worried distance. The remaining 10 or so people looked at each other, wondering what they should do next. "Let's take another 10-minute break from practice," the choir leader said. "But we'll probably have to continue practicing anyway, because it's going to be difficult to get everyone together again, and the event is very close." Everyone nodded in understanding before letting everything proceed as normal. Not long after, Cherry and her friends returned. At first, Tanrak expected to see the girl in a different outfit, but no, Cherry was still wearing Barth's novice monk attire. The owner of the shirt was left with only the upper half of his body bare, yet he seemed indifferent, more concerned with the situation unfolding than his own state. Tanrak turned away again when he saw Barth's body fully, a whirlwind of conflicting emotions swirling within him. "You can continue now." The choir leader spoke as if nothing had happened, and everyone else tried to get through it as if nothing had occurred as well. The same music began to play again, but if the gaze of the Son of God were looking down from the cross above, he would surely see that the choir, rejoicing in praise, was filled with unbearable strangeness, especially one couple standing out in the center. The man was shirtless, while the woman was dressed as a seminarian. "O Lord, please grant me your immense love. Cleanse my troubled heart, my heart filled with jealousy. O Lord, please grant me the path of light. Lead me to love, a love that is unconditional and unpossessive." The novice, a pilgrim on the path to paradise, turned to look at Christ once more, pleading for compassion and mercy to purify his heart. But perhaps it wasn't enough, or in a sense, he had become a sinner whom God would no longer accept. The young man's heart trembled, his voice wavered as he sang the divine message, but it wasn't enough to swallow all his frustration deep within once more. "Please, Lord, please grant me your immense love and cleanse my troubled heart, a heart filled with jealousy." Tanrak's voice sang out from a place of pain rather than a melodic response to the lyrics. The young man seemed to have forgotten how to breathe, especially when he turned to look at the man and woman who had become the center of all attention. The sparkling eyes and smiles of his bandmates, after the short rehearsal, created a new wave of sound that no one had anticipated. At the same time, it became a sound that haunted Tanrak everywhere he went. "Cherry and Barth, Cherry and Barth, Cherry and Barth." Those whispered words haunted him in place of love everywhere, from the choir, the cafeteria, the classroom, the showers, and in his own soul, through countless dreams. The voice gradually transformed into Adam and Eve. The young man felt as if he saw branches swaying in the breeze, the bitter green of weeds, the sweet fragrance of ripe apples. In his dreams, he repeatedly asked himself, Tanrak's thought, "Who am I? Who am I in this perfect equation? The venomous serpent, Lilith, or the son banished from the Garden of Paradise long ago?" Chapter 11. Tanrak had to go to choir rehearsals more and more often each week. In truth, this time of year was usually fun. There wasn't much to do in a seminarian's life. Rehearsing day and night and performing in front of a packed hall seemed like a source of pride, at least for many years. But not this time, and not this year. The young man felt exhausted and always resisted the rehearsals, especially the ones at the cathedral that involved rehearsals of all the notes in the song. "Wait for me." A voice came from behind. Tanrak was walking out of his dormitory with his bag slung over his shoulder, heading to singing practice. He quickened his pace. "I told you to wait." The sound was close to his ear, mixed with heavy breathing. A faint scent of sweat assaulted his senses first. The young man stood stiffly while his friend held his shoulders, as if afraid the approaching person would run away. Tanrak turned around, but tried to keep his expression completely neutral. "What's up?" "I was just lost in thought," he said, trying to cover it up. "I told you to wait so we could walk together." Barth told him that morning to wait for him to walk to church together during choir rehearsal, but Tanrak had forgotten, or pretended to forget. "Sorry, I was just lost in thought," Tanrak repeated, having no other intention than running out of other excuses. If he had to admit the truth, the young man would have to say he wanted to avoid seeing his friend for a while, at least until the sound of Cherry and Barth, Cherry and Barth, Cherry and Barth faded from his head. "I told you I have something to discuss with you," the other person said, sounding slightly irritated. "What's up?" Instead of reacting emotionally, he pretended not to notice, acting as if nothing had happened. The distance from the dorm to the cathedral where they rehearsed was about a 15-minute walk. Normally, the faculty provided a shuttle, but walking helped to change the mood and atmosphere. Father just called Nob in to discuss Christmas arrangements. Barth began to tell him about Nob, who was the leader of the choir, as he quickened his pace to walk alongside him. "Ah, what is it?" Father said he'd like the choir to put on a small performance to accompany the singing. He thinks the children would enjoy it. He also wants to open registration for a call to action camp, in case more children become interested. Those who walked together explained further that the calling camp was a camp dedicated to studying Christian teachings. It was mostly for pre-high school students to get to know different aspects of the teachings. If anyone showed promise or interest, they would be encouraged to apply to become a seminarian. "So, Nob came to invite you to perform, huh?" Instead of interrupting, Tanrak stopped. Barth hesitated, a startled expression on his face. He eventually let out a long sigh of relief. "Yeah, that's why I came to ask you first," the other person said. You're asking me? Whether you're performing or not, you should ask yourself. "Why are you asking me?" he said, chuckling. "I don't know. Lately, you seem a little unhappy with me. So I wanted to ask you first to put my mind at ease. I'm afraid you might get angry with me later." Barth spoke in a hesitant voice, as if he wasn't sure about what he was saying. Tanrak, listening, could only shake his head. "How could I be angry with you? Do whatever you want. Go ahead." Tanrak shrugged as if indifferent, but inwardly he felt like he had already envisioned something unfolding. After this sentence, Barth changed the subject as if he had nothing to worry about anymore. It didn't take long before they arrived at the church, their destination. Tanrak's thought, if my imagination is correct, Barth will play Joseph the carpenter, while Cherry will play Mary. Together, they will witness the arrival of the Son of the Redeemer as righteous parents in this Christmas-themed performance. The choir leader explained the process of the new singing performance, which would involve accompanying the singing with acting. The performance would be divided into short scenes, with a narrator providing commentary between scenes. This would alternate with scenes of standing choral singing before continuing the performance, and the cycle would repeat until the end. "Mary, I'm sorry. I have tried knocking on every door of every house, but I found only this one place in Bethlehem that could offer you warmth." Barth spoke, holding a lengthy passage from The Worries in the Stable, an early scene during the opening of Christmas Day, where the pregnant Mary finds no suitable place to stay overnight. "You need not worry, Joseph. It's warm here. I feel calm and am not cold or afraid at all." Cherry spoke, holding a sheet of paper with the script in her hand. She gestured towards the designated areas, which likely represented an animal pen and a haystack. "I will find as much warmth for you as a humble carpenter can. Trust me, Mary." Barth continued speaking, simultaneously taking the blanket that covered him and wrapping it around Cherry, who was shivering from the cold. The two embraced with pure hearts, gazing up at the sky above, a symbol of God's immense power. Very good, Nob interrupted, amidst a few claps. But amazed glances from all directions were fixed in one direction. Tanrak didn't want to lie to himself, but Barth and Cherry were truly well suited to each other, as befitting Joseph the carpenter and the Virgin Mary. Tanrak walked away from the choir, heading straight to the restroom to calm himself down. Upon reaching it, he turned on the tap and splashed water on his face. For a split second, the water splashed, as if awakening his senses. Tanrak stared at his reflection. Tanrak's thought, "Why?" A single question echoed in his mind and ended without further ado. Tanrak reached out and stroked the stubble of beard, fading with age and hormonal changes. His hand moved lower to caress the prominent Adam's apple, the flat chest, and the body devoid of curves. "Tanrak, are you all right?" A very familiar voice was the first to speak. Turning around, he found the actor who had been playing Joseph standing there for who knows how long. He felt quite embarrassed that he might inadvertently show any strange reaction, but he forced himself to act as normal as possible. "No, I was just sleepy, so I came to wash my face," he said. "Really? I thought you were acting strangely." Barth hesitated. "I'm not feeling well either, so I was thinking of going home early." Tanrak spoke, shifting uncomfortably, wanting desperately to avoid the other person's gaze. He couldn't help but be disturbed by the image of the intimate embrace between the two, a man and a woman of great reverence. In contrast, Barth extended his hand towards him with a look of concern. "Let me try. Don't touch me." Tanrak inadvertently gasped in surprise, causing the person in front of him to freeze and not know what to do. The atmosphere in the restroom became incredibly awkward. "Sorry, I was startled. If I have a cold, I might have germs. If you come closer, you might catch them. You have to keep acting. If I get sick, it'll be a big mess." "Probably not," Barth argued. "Trust me, I think I'd better go home. I can't take it anymore." Tanrak quickly summarized the situation before hurrying out to meet the head of the choir. He told him in a firm voice that he was too ill to continue singing and needed to leave. The other man seemed hesitant and didn't seem to understand what was going on. "I'll walk my friend home myself." One voice suggested it, and it was Barth. This time, the troop leader found it even more difficult to decide, because the person who offered was also the main character in the performance. But perhaps because of his seeming unwillingness to accept any refusal, Nob could only nod in agreement. "Have a safe trip back and get plenty of rest." The conversation ended there, before the two young men walked out of the deserted cathedral in silence. Although the music continued to play inside, it was already evening outside, and no one was passing by anymore. Tanrak and Barth walked with their heads down, barely speaking. At first, Barth tried to engage Tanrak in conversation, but Tanrak only gave short, monosyllabic answers, until Barth, feeling helpless, decided to remain silent. It took almost 10 minutes to reach their accommodation. "Go take a shower first. Even just washing yourself off is better than sleeping in sweat." Barth protested as Tanrak looked like he was about to lie down on the bed, ignoring everything else. But when he was reminded, the young man felt sticky all over, making it hard to fall asleep. Finally, he got up, gathered his things, and went to the bathroom as his friend suggested. The bathroom was now empty. The large cement tub filled with water had only 2 occupants left. The 2 novices usually bathed together, a practice they were all too familiar with. Tanrak thought he was used to it all along, until he turned around and saw Barth stripping off his clothes, leaving nothing to cover his body. Not even a single piece.